an hour, suffering only from sunburn and sore feet. The captives were force-marched 200 miles from Andrada to Kapanga in Zaire, before coming home via Portugal.
Midnight in Lisbon, and the Unita hostages reached Europe. Nearly 200 exhausted survivors of a forced march across the Angolan border to Zaire and rescued by the Red Cross. With them, 4 British engineers seized when rebel forces overran their mining camp.
And Unita came into the town from all sides. They completely surrounded Andrada and moved in with pretty heavy gunfire.
There was so much bullets flying all directions that everybody really had to lie on the floor at that particular time. When they actually got near to the actual building as such, that I would say everybody was at a very nervous state at that particular time.
There was mortars and all sorts of rockets and heavy gunfire.
After we were captured, we were taken approximately 15 kilometers across a bridge and further away from Andrada.
Unita treated us fairly good. We all basically, they ate what we ate. We slept what they slept.
These men were lucky. The 200 hostages were too many for Unita to march 700 miles back to base camp. So still in their Red Cross-issued tracksuits, they flew back to Britain tonight unscathed. Ian Glover-James, ITN, Lisbon.
Good evening to you. The main story north tonight. A Perth man is freed by Angolan rebels after a 3-week nightmare ordeal and is at this moment on his way home to an emotional reunion with his wife. And a leading conservationist that 9 climbers tell how they managed to survive a night of near disasters on the Cairngorms in hurricane-force winds. The battle for control of Whisky Giant's distillers enters the final phase as Guinness are told they're free to bid for the company. And a leading conservationist hits out at the callousness of commercial deer poachers who are increasing their activities in the Highlands. In a few minutes' time, in London, a Perth man kidnapped by Unita rebels in Angola will be reunited with his wife at Gatwick Airport. 42-year-old John Sutherland survived a grueling ordeal at the hands of the anti-Marxist guerrillas before being released and beginning to flight to safety that took him from Zaire to the Portuguese capital of Lisbon, and at this very moment to home soil. Rachel Innes has been charting John Sutherland's nightmare in captivity.
A Portuguese government charter flight brought nearly 200 refugees, including John Sutherland and 3 other Britons, to safety last night from Zaire's capital, Kinshasa. There were scenes of great confusion inside Lisbon airport as the exhausted hostages reflected on their gruelling 3-week ordeal. They'd been forced to walk 200 miles through the bush, sleeping rough and surviving on rice and sardines, until they reached Kapanga, where they were handed over to the International Red Cross. John Sutherland, a maintenance engineer at the Andrada diamond mine, describes their capture.
We were eventually all captured at 6:30, and by 8:30 basically it was all over. The whole Andrada was captured, and then we were marched approximately 27 kilometres out of Andrada that first day, and we've done approximately 30 to 60 kilometres each day walking.
John Sutherland's release ended a 3-week nightmare for his wife Pam and their 2 teenage children who live at Murray's Hill Road in Scone. She's flown south to welcome her husband home in about half an hour's time, but has already spoken to him on the phone in Lisbon. She says she's as glad as he is that the whole ordeal is over. She says you just never think it'll happen to you.
Well, now the rest of today's news from...
4 British engineers who were captured by rebels in Angola 3 weeks ago are tonight on their way home. Their plane will be landing at Gatwick Airport within the next hour. The 4 men were among 200 people taken prisoner by the right-wing Unita guerrilla group. From the Angolan town of Andrada, they were forced to march nearly 200 miles to Mapanga in the neighbouring Zaire before Unita handed them over to the Red Cross.
Kinshasa Airport, the first stop homewards for the hostages after a gruelling 2.5-week forced march with the guerrillas through the Angolan bush. The 4 Britons talked of scorching heat with water and food in short supply.
It was difficult throughout the whole period that we were there.
Were you attacked at any stage during your way in Angola?
No, initially the whole trip we were treated reasonably well from the start to the finish.
Do you think the morale of the group was kept fairly high during the whole way?
Yes, extremely high. I had the good fortune to have 3 extremely good and capable colleagues, and I'm very proud to have been with them.
As they boarded a flight to Portugal, all seemed in good health apart from one Filipino. He needed treatment for shock and stomach pains. The 4 Britons complained only of sore feet and sunburn and the need for a good bath. Red Cross workers were on hand for their arrival at Lisbon. So were the families of the Portuguese hostages. The release of this group came unexpectedly quickly. It had been feared that, like the 100 foreigners kidnapped in Angola in 1984, they'd be taken on a still longer march to Unita headquarters. Then the guerrilla leader, Dr. Savimbi, made much political capital out of their release. That puzzle wasn't worrying the parents of Simon Tingay, one of the freed Britons, as they prepared to see him back home tonight at their pub in the West Country.
So delighted. I really can't put it I put it very strongly. Thrilled to bits. So pleased.
A part of a large group of foreigners, including women and children, who were seized when the rebels overran a diamond mining town.
Midnight in Lisbon, and the Unita hostages reached Europe. Nearly 200 exhausted survivors of a forced march across the Angolan border to Zaire and rescued by the Red Cross. With them, 4 British engineers seized when rebel forces overran their mining camp.
And Unita came into the town from all sides. They completely surrounded Andrada and moved in with pretty heavy gunfire.
There was so much bullets flying all directions that everybody really had to lie on the floor at that particular time. When they actually got near to the actual building as such, that I would say everybody was at a very nervous state at that particular time.
There was mortars and all sorts of rockets and heavy gunfire.
After we were captured, we were taken approximately 15 kilometers across a bridge and further away from Andrada.
You need to treat us fairly good. We all basically, they ate what we ate. We slept where they slept.
These men were lucky. The 200 hostages were too many for Unita to march 700 miles back to base camp. So still in their Red Cross-issued tracksuits, they flew back to Britain tonight unscathed. Ian Glover-James, ITN, Lisbon.
The engineers captured by Unita guerrillas in Angola 3 weeks ago are tonight back in Britain. Their plane touched down at Gatwick Airport a short time ago. The men were among nearly 200 taken prisoner in the Angolan town of Andrada. They were then marched 200 miles into Zaire before being released.
Kinshasa Airport, first stop to freedom after the hostages' forced march with the guerrillas. All seemed in good health except one Filipino, suffering stomach pains and shock. The 4 Britons complained only of sore feet and sunburn and made the most of the food and drink they'd been denied in the Angolan bush. Red Cross workers met them at Lisbon. So did the families of the Portuguese hostages. And when the Britons finally reached Gatwick tonight, they were clearly delighted that their ordeal was over.
When you take 200 people through the bush and you take them through torrential rain, you take them through one of the hottest temperatures in Africa, and you take them something like 18 hours a day, it's amazing just how much the body will stand.
And what kept you going throughout the ordeal?
I'm British.
All 4 men said they'd like to go back to Angola, but not just yet.
Engineers captured by the Savimbi guerrillas in Angola have got back home. A report next.
The 4 Britons freed by Unita guerrillas in Angola arrived home a short time ago. They said they'd lived on rice and sardines and slept rough, but had been treated well. They were among nearly 200 men, women and children snatched from a diamond mine near Andrada and forced marched 200 miles through bush to Kapanga in Zaire before flying home via Portugal.
Midnight in Lisbon, and the Unita hostages reached Europe. Nearly 200 exhausted survivors of a forced march across the Angolan border to Zaire. With them, 4 British engineers seized when rebel forces overran their mining camp.
Around about 4:30 in the morning, we heard what we thought after a rainy night was thunder. Then we realized it was gunfire, and Unita came into the town from all sides. They completely surrounded Andrada and moved in.
There was so much bullets flying all directions that everybody really had to lie on the floor at that particular time. When they actually got near to the actual building as such, that I would say everybody was at a very nervous state at that particular time.
There was mortars and all sorts of rockets and heavy gunfire.
After we were captured, we were taken approximately 15 kilometres across a bridge and further away from Andrada, where we stayed one evening, and we were given food and water.
They were quite good. Oftentimes, while they were doing their bootlaces up, or they wanted to climb on a truck or something, they'd don you their AK rifle to hold, you know. They were so trusting in that respect. I wouldn't like to cross them on the other way.
Unita treated us fairly good. We all basically, they ate what we ate. We slept where they slept. They've got a job to do like everybody else, and they're fighting for whatever they believe is right. It's just unfortunate that we were in between it.
What are your feelings now? Would you go back and work there?
I don't know. I don't know about that. Not at this stage.
Foreigners in Angola's Diamond Belt are targets in the economic warfare Unita's western-backed guerrillas inflict on Angola's Marxist government. These men knew the risks and flew home tonight, two still in Red Cross-issued tracksuits, harbouring no bitterness towards their captors. Ian Glover-James, News at 10, Lisbon.
Back in Britain tonight, the four men walked their last steps to freedom, looking weary, thinner than when their families last saw them, but generally in good shape. A champagne flight eased the last leg of the journey. They'd lost all their clothes and possessions on the long march, but for their waiting relatives, all that mattered was that they were here. Their lost possessions had helped save lives.
At one particular stage, we had to sell, basically barter, all the food, all our clothes to buy food. And we had to sell our trousers, our shoes, our socks, our pants.
I wasn't too pleased to be taken captive, but I can understand their point of view.
And what kept you going throughout the ordeal?
I'm British.
Kept her going along the march, just thinking about home. Just thinking about home, because sooner or later we will reach there. After what we suffered from the beginning to what we got now, it's fantastic.
Happiness was a pipe to replace the one Keith Dighton had bartered for food. Togetherness for husband and a wife, relieved that the ordeal is all over. Brent Sadler, News at 10, Gatwick.
People who work abroad in the world's flashpoints, that they might become victims of other nations' wars or hostages for other people's causes. Well, on March the 1st, the nightmare became reality for four Britons who were among 200 foreigners snatched by Unita rebels in Angola. The rebels launched a wildcat mortar raid on the town of Andrada and forced their captives to trek hundreds of kilometres through dangerous bush country in Kapanga in Zaire. Well, on March 17th, the hostages were freed, and after being treated by the Red Cross, the Britons boarded a homeward flight and were reunited with their families at Gatwick on Friday. And we're joined now from Dundee by John Sutherland, one of the released men. Good morning, John. Welcome back.
Thank you.
When you first went out there, did you realise that it was going to be a dangerous place to work?
No, initially we thought the place would be safe, Andrada itself, because there's never been reports of any incidents actually in Andrada as such.
Can you describe to us what it was like when the rebels attacked Andrada?